I opened up Facebook this morning. I saw a shot on a college football discussion page with a picture of the Heisman Trophy. And the question was, what player comes to mind as soon as you see that Heisman Trophy? I scroll down the list of comments. I don't see the obvious. So I, of course, have to chime in. One man has two. All right, we're talking Ohio State football here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We do it each and every week with Steve Hellwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports, and also Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone. Kevin Noon and his hair is much more important than Ohio State football, apparently. How are you guys doing today?
Doing good.
I'm doing good. I'm just finishing up the last bit of lunch.
Hey, we'll take it. Any way we can get you, Steve, we will take you.
And I'm going to get my hair cut today because it's
you got a nice full head of hair going there, Steve.
I got a helmet head, a 2 month. Usually I go in about a 4-week cycle, and it's been about 10 weeks, so it's time.
Well, what I've learned from my, should I even go into this? But I've already started from my various travels and relationships is that the ladies either love that or they hate it. They go either way on that. It's kind of like the facial hair. So.
Yeah,
you'd get a lot of thumbs up for that full head of hair out there, Steve.
Yeah.
All right, on to Ohio State football. We invite your comments, your questions, your debate topics in the live chat. We're also on Facebook Live. We'll see what that does for us right there as well. Our Florida State show that we do on Tuesday nights doesn't get nearly the traffic that we do on YouTube for Ohio State. We got over 2,000 views on that baby right now, so we shall see. All right. What do you guys, concerning all this talk that's going and circling around college football concerning when the season's going to start? SEC officials are getting together on May 22nd, 1 week from today, to decide if June 1st is still their go date. Lincoln Riley says June 1st is crazy. Pac-12 coaches got together this week. Justin Wilcox, in particular at Cal, said, if I got to take my team out of state, I will do that to practice, to prepare for a season. Based on your conversations this week, I think this is the subject everybody's obviously gunning for first and foremost, Steve. You guys had some discussions this week. What did you take from those?
Yeah, Mark. Basically, I had a chance to talk to somebody who works at Ohio State kind of off the record this week. And I asked, behind the scenes, are there discussions about when this could happen? And we've seen that Iowa talked about June 1st. They would be bringing their athletes back to campus. Ohio State's summer semester begins July the 9th, or rather June 9th. And typically what would happen is the guys would be in school for part of May, a May semester, go home for a week, and then come back June 9th and really start in for about 8 weeks of both summer classes and 2 or 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, whatever, of conditioning at the practice facility with Mickey Marotti kind of leading the way. And they would have 2 or 3 groups a day go through there. And obviously everything's in a holding pattern right now. A lot of the other sports would do similar things. Basketball, the way Ohio State's academic calendar is structured, there are various summer dates. I think there's another summer semester that begins right after that, probably a little bit later. And the basketball program in recent years hasn't been bringing its guys back until that second date, probably about the 20th or 22nd of June. So it's kind of a staggered academic situation. But what it allows is these guys to get credits in the off season while they're working on their craft, et cetera. So I talked to him and he said they are hopeful. Nothing has been decided concrete, but they remain very hopeful that they can have their athletes back on campus on or about June 9th. And honestly, that date is not as important this year because Ohio State has decreed that all summer classes will be online at this point. There's no in-classroom instruction unless it's a laboratory situation or something like that where you have to have hands-on learning or whatever, whatever that may be. Again, I'm just kind of speaking in general terms here. So this is a year, for at least from an academic standpoint, where it's not as important that they are in proximity to the campus area, although always tied back to the summer football conditioning program that they were joined in one and the same. So whether that date will remain June 9 or whether it'll be pushed back a bit, I heard what Lincoln Riley said, that he thinks June 1st is ridiculous, that they can still have a season if they wait a little while longer, get a little deeper into it, have better precautions, better protocols, and everything else in shape. I saw Ohio University has announced that they will be open for business in the fall. And I think that's an interesting sister institution type thing, both of them state schools in the state of Ohio, and that Ohio University has said that. So a lot of dynamics at play. And I think that we all remain very hopeful that the season will go off literally close to what we think a regular college football season should look like.
Yeah, and I think Lincoln Riley got a lot of, grief or attention for saying June 1 is too early. But he's also saying, I think we're going to play and we can play. But when coaches are talking about, Ryan Day saying 6 weeks is probably the baseline of where teams need, that's kind of what the coaches have talked about, 6 weeks for total of a couple weeks of conditioning and then 4 weeks of practice. And then you start the season. So we're talking mid-June, second week of July rather. So to get players on campus or in the weight rooms by June 1, it is early for what some coaches have agreed is, the July or the 6 week time frame. And I think the fear is, Lincoln Riley's fear is, you get in there and then something happens and everybody has to come out. Whereas if you just wait longer and more stuff is found, more you can do things. Just, as we go on, things become more available. PPE stuff becomes more available. Things like that. Where you go right now, you're going to be dealing with issues. I did think it was interesting. Josh Myers. We talked to Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis this week, Ohio State center and guard. And Myers said he would feel safer at Ohio State right now, because they would be confined. And his concern as a young person isn't necessarily coming down with COVID. It's passing it on to his parents and to family members. And he said, you don't want to be away from your family, but he would feel safer because he would not be passing something along to them.
Got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone, Steve Hillwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports. As Steve has just let everyone know in the live chat, bring your comments, your questions right now, debate topics, talking Ohio State football. And that was the big headline that caught everybody's attention in regards to Wyatt Davis and Josh Myers making that statement, basically that, you want us to sign a waiver, we'll sign a waiver, whatever you want us to do. We want to play football this year. These guys know, and I'm not discounting other teams across the nation, but this is a pretty special group when it comes to what was accomplished last year, what was nearly accomplished, and the talent coming back. They know that not necessarily that it's now or never, but they have an opportunity to do something special that, depending on your perspective last year, they certainly achieved for the most part, but came within a whisker of completing the whole task there.
Yeah, no question. I think enough of those players from last year's team are back, including most of a couple of the key wide receivers with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Obviously, the quarterback, who was number 3 in the Heisman Trophy balloting and is the top returning vote getter for the Heisman Trophy from last season. He's back, and in a lot of people's minds, a favorite to win the Heisman Trophy. So that's good. Some holes on defense and really critically in the secondary, where you only have one starter, Sean Wade, coming back. And yet I think a lot of people look at Ohio State as the prohibitive Big Ten favorite. I've seen a lot of people start to push Wisconsin as and I think ESPN's FPI has them as a potential top 10 team, if not top 5. And I think some of that could be schedule related. They don't play Ohio State during the regular season, would only play them in the championship game, obviously. I think they play Notre Dame on a neutral field. I want to say that game's at Lambeau Field
Neutral.
which won't necessarily be neutral field, although Notre Dame will have great support there as well, being proximate to Chicago. But I look at it and I think that what you hear those players say is, we have put so much into this, and we collectively as a group have built this program to the point where we don't want to skip a season. We don't want to miss an opportunity to win a national championship and achieve immortality within what we do. And for those two guys, Davis and Myers, they are both potential NFL first or second round draft picks. If they play like they're capable of playing in the 2020 season and dominate like they feel they have a chance to dominate, they play side by side and do an outstanding job in that interior. They lost Jonah Jackson, who plays alongside them, but I think the thought is that Harry Miller, an outstanding sophomore, is going to move right into that spot. So their mind is the offense is just going to pick right up where it left off. There's no J.K. Dobbins, 2,000-yard rusher, but there are a handful of running backs to choose from, I think. So their thought is, any way, shape, or form, both for our team and for our individual growth and for our individual marketability as an NFL commodity, those three reasons they want to play. So I think you'll see a lot of people mirror what they had to say.
Yeah, Josh Myers, I think he said it would be devastating if they can't play this year. And those two guys put the NFL on hold for another year. So this is basically their contract year. And they're certainly not alone. So they were expecting to use this season not only to win a national championship, which is the goal, but to advance themselves. And Wyatt Davis, the number one guard in the draft, possibly Josh Myers might be the number one center. And now they don't get a second year of starting to show that, and they have to make a decision. Do you go now or do you come back? When it's tough for a lot of guys when you go into a season expecting this to be your last, to then have to have another season after that. Generally, they'll go anyway. Damon Arnett was talked out of it, and it worked for him. But there's a lot of guys on this team, and I think just knowing how good they could be and all of the pieces they have returning, and Steve said, the secondary has some question marks, but this is Ohio State, and there should be guys there available to fill them out. Ryan Day is desperate for this season based on how last year ended and what he thinks this team can do, and he's not alone. And he's telling this team that this is just a test, and whichever teams are best prepared to go through what they're going through right now, and they come out of this, the teams that come out of this the best, they'll show it on the field this season. And when you look in the rankings in December, it'll be the teams who handled what is going on right now the best. And so that's what they've been doing. It's the whole accountability aspect. It's a test of the culture. It's a test of the program. And Ohio State, they feel pretty good about what they're doing. Now it's a matter of you get them back on campus and you see exactly where everybody stands. But for the most part, I mean, about as well as you could be handling things, I think, is how OSU feels about the situation right now.
I've brought it up before, and there's so much work and preparation between now and at this point. But going into game number one, game week, you guys will be asking the question. I will be fascinated to hear the response, how coaches are going to motivate players in an empty stadium. That's that dynamic, especially in college football, all sports, but college football, where the crowd plays such a part in the atmosphere. And the volume is going to be just to convey to it's one thing, the players will have the head knowledge. This is just as important as it was last year and the year before. But just what's pumping through their veins and that adrenaline rush that's going to be void to a certain extent, that's going to be fascinating for me to watch.
Yeah, we don't know at this point. It seems unlikely that they'll play in front of a full stadium. Maybe at least early in the season, maybe by the end of the season, some of the restrictions, if the flow of the disease has been, or the virus has been curtailed and it's not as contagious a situation in November as it is in September, then perhaps they can increase the capacity. Honestly, I don't think we know yet. I think there's so much at stake here for all these coaches and all these athletes. It's the coaches' salaries, it's the athletes' scholarships. And I think that any way that they can try and play is wonderful. What we're seeing with baseball right now is you have a season that's been chopped in half. So a guy who was supposed to make 20 million is now only, theoretically going to make 10 million. But what the owners are saying is 40% of our revenue, and this was a similar thing to what Gene Smith told us, I think, on one of the calls, 30 to 40% of their revenue comes from the tickets, the concessions, the parking, the memorabilia, everything that's purchased at the stadium, the merchandise. So you take that out of the equation, and just throwing back my baseball thought again, a lot of people want to demonize the owners. And in this case, I think they have a valid argument that that guy who's now, if they only play half the season, is supposed to make 10 million. 4 million of that's unfunded because I've lost out on all the live gate revenue. He should only be making 6 million. So the same principle comes back to college athletics. Not that we're paying the players 10, 6, or $4 million. It's just the overall funding of the athletic budget. Ohio State's got a $200 million budget, and you take out those millions each of those 7 Saturdays where there's no tickets and there's no parking, concessions, and memorabilia and merchandise and programs and all that stuff, then what are you left with? Are you left with enough to where you can fully fund the coaching staffs, the support staff, and all of the scholarships, which they pay dollar for dollar? If the list price on Justin Fields' out-of-state scholarship is $25,000 or whatever, they pay dollar for dollar for that every year. So a lot to be considered there. My guess is there'll be a lot of people laid off within the athletic department. You wouldn't need event staff, at least to the degree that you would if you were having 105,000 people. You wouldn't need ticketing people, et cetera, and so on. Those people would be put on hiatus until you have live events. So I don't know. I think, again, the first hurdle is just agreeing that we're going to have a season. How are they going to prepare for the season? And then how are you going to present the season, either with fans or without, just for television? How's that going to work? And I don't think that we, and Ohio State's in a tough bind here because the president, Michael Drake, is a lame duck, and he should have been already out the door. He was going to retire at the end of the spring semester, which is already come and gone at the end of April. And he's kind of left to ride out through this transition of getting back onto campus and, whatever. In the past, I know when they've had presidents leave, the number 2 person, whoever that is, the provost or whoever that is, has kind of stepped in as the acting president. And I haven't seen anything like that happen. I don't want to say it's a vacuum of leadership right now at Ohio State, but, is he going to be comfortable making decisions that, could put people in harm's way? I mean, I don't know. I don't think he's going to be in a real hurry to make a decision and have his legacy be that he brought football guys back on campus and 40 of them caught COVID. I don't know. And I again, just speaking off the top of my head, just throwing it out there. I don't know. So I guess we'll take each day as it comes. The problem is there's no college football commissioner. Mark Emmert from the NCAA said this is something that will be determined by local governments, universities, conferences on their own. We cannot mandate you're going to play on this date or everyone's going to start working out on this date. It is by its very nature a piecemeal operation. The only thing, they lightly govern over football, basically agreeing to set this is the date of the first game, this is the date of the last game, these are the dates you'll play bowl games, these are your recruiting rules, these are what you can have on your staff, and that's kind of their overseeing of football right there in a nutshell. They really don't get involved in the nuts and bolts too much, and now we're left with a lot of nuts and bolts all over the country making decisions about when they're going to piecemeal return to college football.
We've got questions coming in. Navy Thomas, you're my guy. Love the support. You're always here for me, but we are not addressing the Nebraska quarterback transfer to Rutgers nor the LSU kicker transfer to Nebraska. Ryan Doss is asking about Trey Sirmon. Of course, I believe he scored his first collegiate touchdown back in 2017 against the Buckeyes, almost 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns in 2018, Tony. In regards to, he seems to be a perfect fit for what was a possible void at running back.
Yeah, and he's a pass catcher. He's a pass blocker. He's a good runner. In terms of what type of season, I'm expecting some kind of a committee type of deal. I don't think he's looking at 300 carries or anything like that. He might get 150, 160, and what can he do? Averaging 7 yards a carry like he does. You're talking about 1,000 yards, something like that. But he has to stay healthy. My big concern for him is, why did he disappear? Why did he not get any touches against Texas last year? And then from there, was it just something where Lincoln Riley liked other guys better? I mean, that's a concern for me. But he's also been very productive when he's been given the opportunity. So you give him 160 touches with another 25 catches. Master Teague probably somewhere around there. Marcus Crowley and Steele Chambers, guys are going to deserve carries as well. Justin Fields maybe has 4 or 5 carries in there in each game. But Sirmon, I think I'm not expecting huge things, but I think he has a role where he could rush for 1,000 yards and maybe be the starter and maybe be the guy who gets the carries first. I think there's other guys that have shown that they deserve carries as well. And it would be odd for somebody just to come in for 1 year and command the running back situation, especially when Master Teague rushed for nearly 800 yards last year as the backup. And yeah, that was against mostly fourth quarter depleted defense or tired defense. And Ryan Day said he wants to see what he can do against a healthy, fresh defense, and he'll get that opportunity this year once he gets back from his injury. Marcus Crowley should be good to go by the time the season starts, probably good to go right now from his injury. Because remember, he and Trey Sirmon and Marcus Crowley got injured on the same day, same game, not same game, but same weekend. Different injuries, but they've both been rehabbing and both should be fine. 1,000 yards, 1,100 yards, something like that. But I still wonder why Lincoln Riley just didn't want anything more to do with him.
Brian Money looking at both sides of the football. Good point here about Justin Fields obviously being back. The big challenges for teams out there would be a new coaching staff, which Ohio State doesn't have to deal with. We see that at a number of teams across the country that have to deal with a coaching staff. That's always a transition. When you've got the full off season, they don't have that at, let's say, Florida State, for example. And then just within the division, of course, Michigan State switching out quarterbacks. And Ohio State not having to deal with that. Not that they have any issues in terms of talent on offense. J.K. Dobbins gone, and we just addressed the running backs. The defensive backfield, your thoughts about just kind of reviewing?
That's the maybe the only question on this team. You've got Jordan Fuller was so important to that defense last year as that last line of defense, as that deep safety. He was a great tackler. Things didn't really get past him. Can Josh Proctor be that same last line of defense? That's my biggest question. And then you saw what happened when Sean Wade wasn't in the slot, when he had to leave with Michigan game, the Clemson game. When he wasn't in there, they weren't as good. So who steps up at that slot corner, slot safety? Basically, who are the two safeties, and how well they play will determine how good this defense can be. And it's should be fine everywhere else. I think they'll be fine at corner with Sean Wade and some combination of Sevyn Banks and Cameron Brown. Kerry Combs wants a rotation of 3 corners again. So will those 3 rotate outside, and then will somebody else man the inside, or will those 3 rotate while including, will they rotate from outside to inside and things like that? So there's still, that's the, we didn't get any of those answers in the spring. You didn't get to see who that slot guy was. Can Marcus Hooker step up and be one of those guys? They lost Amir Reep, who was kicked off the team, he was Sean Wade's backup in the slot last year and had some moments, and so he's out of the picture. I think it's just those two safeties, if you want to call that slot corner a safety, the Sean Wade position last year and the Jordan Fuller position from last year. They have to figure out who that is, and they have to be very, very good. And if they are, now you're talking about a national championship defense as well.
Malik Chris is maybe just overthinking the Chase Young void. Of course, he's a great player, maybe the best defensive player in the country, but I believe the pass rush should be fine.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit concerning until you see somebody do it consistently game in and game out. At the end of the year, Zack Harrison was really coming on as a true freshman, so I think they're going to be depending on him. Tyreek Smith has played a lot of football now in 2 years at Ohio State. It's time for him to step up the production as well. I look at Javonte Jean-Baptiste, a third-year sophomore. He's going to be in that mix. Tyler Friday is a guy who, like Tyreek Smith, has now played a good amount of football, and I think that it's within the realm to expect some more production out of him. And Jonathan Cooper, a guy who started quite a bit at Ohio State, he even started, I think, 4 games last year when he redshirted because of injuries and whatever else. I think he's a guy that they can depend on for leadership, and at times he's been an impact pass rusher as well, maybe not on such a consistent basis, but he brings a lot to the table there. So I'm interested to see, as everyone else is, how Zack Harrison responds going into a sophomore year. You don't want the guy to go into a sophomore slump. You want him to be like the Bosa brothers and Chase Young, where, the second year you're pushing toward being an All-American. And to me, that would be huge because he's got that high-end ability, and we knew it from when he was being recruited 2 years ago. He was the top player in Ohio, a national top 5 prospect, and he was starting to scratch the surface of what he could do by the end of the season last year. Larry Johnson still there, obviously, as a defensive line coach, and they'll put together a very good defensive line one way or another. A lot of schools have gone away from the 4-man front, and Ryan Day has talked about it at various times, and he said with the way that Larry Johnson has recruited rush ends and defensive tackles and these kind of things, that they'd be foolish to go away from their strength, and that is the 4-man front. So we'll see if that can continue to pay dividends for them in the upcoming season.
And Zack Harrison's numbers last year were almost identical to Chase Young as a freshman and weren't too far off from Nick Bosa as a freshman. So he's tracking the same way as those guys. And don't forget about Baron Browning, number 3 on the team in sacks last year with 5. Going to do maybe a little bit more rush end stuff this year, some additional third down blitzing off the edge type of deal. We'll see where he ends up. So there's another guy that could add into the pass rushing. They've got so many guys. If they keep Tyreek Smith and Tyler Friday healthy, I think they'll be fine with those guys. Obviously, Jonathan Cooper, keep him healthy. They've got a lot of guys, and they're just getting better and better. And that's how are you going to replace Joey Bosa? How are you going to replace Tyquan Lewis? How are you going to replace Nick Bosa? How do you replace Chase Young? You replace them with the people I just talked about, and so you replace them with Zack Harrison and Tyreek Smith and Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and next year you replace those guys with Jack Sawyer and Adelier, and you keep them going.
We get all sorts of questions here on the live chat. We get the very general things like, can you review the running back situation? We get some very insightful questions. We get some questions that, as I refer to as Google questions, who won the 1957 Rose Bowl? Well, just look it up on Google. You don't need to ask us. Then we get questions like, what if the Florida Gators joined the Big Ten? I don't know where that comes from, but except that it comes from Malik Chris asking about Florida.
Are they in the East or the West?
The South. They'd be in the Big Ten South.
They'd be in the South, the new South Division, the first conference with 3 divisions.
Hey, everybody talks about super conferences all the time. You can never rule anything out. I know Texas and Oklahoma, when the Big Ten took Nebraska, there was some thought Texas or Oklahoma could be lured as well. to some kind of mega conference. And, 14 teams and one champion means 13 unhappy fan bases. So I don't know how you continue to build off what we already have.
Well, Steve, you say unhappy fan bases, but Michigan did, they have celebrated a co-division title.
Yeah, they put it up on the it's
two happy teams in a 14-team league. So
Yeah. Well,
Todd bringing up a fact here that I like to go to from time to time when talking about SEC teams failing to travel. Florida took a trip to Syracuse in 1991. They've not been out of the state for an out-of-conference game since 1991.
Well, they play Florida State every year, so that's their big thing. I find that hard to believe. They've never even played one of those neutral site games in Atlanta or Dallas yet.
A road game. They played Michigan a few years ago, either in Dallas or
that was
Atlanta.
a neutral site. Okay, so they're saying for a true road game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. That's weird. You'd think. I don't know. I mean, they're going to say, well, we play Florida State, which Florida State forever was a top 5 program. So that was all you ever needed. I mean, in recent years, last 10 years, they have been barely a top 25 program. I guess they did play for national championship one of those years in there. And I don't know, did Jimbo win one year? Didn't they beat Auburn, or Auburn beat them? Or
2013.
Yeah. Okay.
And they don't need to travel for recruiting purposes. Like Notre Dame likes to go to California, and Ohio State, will travel around to be seen. They don't need to do that because they've got all the talent in the world down there in Florida. But still, wouldn't you want your players to experience something, outside of your footprint? Give them, just something new, something to sell the recruits that we will get you. We'll get you out of the state. You can travel. Michigan takes players over to Europe, but all Gainesville will do is we'll take you down and we'll take you over to Tallahassee. Well, I guess.
Bobby Bowden once built a program traveling everywhere. Basically said, this is the only way I can get it done and get our name out there is to go to Nebraska, Notre Dame, Ohio State. He had a couple of years that just had a ridiculous. They were an independent at the time.
And then eventually he scheduled 2 FCS teams in the same year because he wanted wins and didn't want to punish players. Didn't want to punish the team when guys would get in trouble and he wouldn't suspend them for big games, or he'd schedule their suspensions for easier games because he didn't want to punish the entire team because a couple of kids were messing up. So, yeah, I guess you do it. You do what you have to until you no longer do what you have to. Then you do what you want to.
This is the other type comment that I find amusing. So Malik Chris is back at it with Florida could beat Penn State, Iowa, Purdue, Michigan State, Nebraska, and Indiana. Well, almost all those teams, if not all of them, they could all beat Florida on a given Saturday. Most of the teams in the country can beat most of the teams in the country somewhere between a 20 and 80%, win probability. It's possible. Yes. All right. I'm looking at a site called 247 Sports that says that the Ohio State 2021 recruiting top target list has been reshuffled and refined, Steve.
Yeah, how about that? Every week, there's so much movement with recruiting that you gotta update it. I know one of their top targets, Emeka Egbuka, an outstanding wide receiver out of Washington, is set to announce his top 4 schools. I think that's coming up tonight at 6 or 9 o'clock Eastern time. I'm not sure. I didn't get the exact time, but tonight he's going to announce his top 4 schools. I think Ohio State's going to firmly be in that group. And the Buckeyes, after taking G. Scott out of Washington last year, are all over the place in Washington now. The other one out there is JT Tui Malohau. He is a defensive end and a lineman out of the state of Washington. And he is ranked as the nation's number 4 overall prospect. So if they could get one or both of those guys out of the state of Washington, it would certainly help pad the lead that they already have for the nation's top class for 2021. Some other guys, that are up there. J.C. Latham is an offensive lineman that the Buckeyes have been tracking, and he's probably at or near the top of their wish list. In Ohio, they've pretty much picked Ohio clean with what they want. They have 18 commitments right now, but there's always that possibility. And if there is football in the fall, that maybe an Ohio kid would jump out of the mix and be in there. Hard to say. I know a couple other guys, a wide receiver, Troy Stellato, and a tight end, Hudson Wolf, could also be on their wish list. So Ryan Day and his guys get down to the last probably 4 or 5 spots in the recruiting class for 2021. They have 18 commitments. They have 18 seniors that are set to be on the roster this coming season. And you kind of start with that as your target number, 18, but then you notice, you have Justin Fields, Sean Wade, potentially Tyreek Smith, the 2 guys we talked to yesterday, Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis. All those guys in some way, shape, or form, 4 or 5 of them could be looking to jump to the NFL, and that would take your class size out to 23 or 24 pretty easily. So I think that's probably a pretty good target number right now in the mid-20s for Ohio State in 2021.
Yeah, the Emeka Egbuka, the number 1 receiver in the nation. I think everybody feels pretty good about Ohio State's chances there. And the Tuimoloau went to the same school as G. Scott, so they're former teammates. There's a connection there. And this Washington Pipeline, who would have thought any year? But I guess the last couple of years, it's good to get in there with the players that they're churning out. And I don't know what state is next. Colorado, Maine. We know Michigan has Massachusetts. They've got a wall around Massachusetts, so Ohio State will leave that alone. Maybe Ryan Day can hit up the old homestead and put a fence around New Hampshire next.
There you go. Yeah, I've seen guys come and go from a lot of places. Brandon Bowen was from Utah, I think, and I don't know, just they've had a couple guys from Colorado, but it's been hard to get anybody from Colorado to really pan out. They've always kind of gotten injured or whatever. I know Joey O'Connor was an offensive lineman about 7 or 8 years ago that was highly touted out of there and didn't work out. They had a linebacker from there too that didn't end up panning out either as well. But I don't know. I guess over time, you look at it. They're still waiting to see from Nevada how Haskell Garrett's going to turn out, and who knew he'd be the better part of that bargain with Martell. So there you go.
Tommy Chogia probably be starting at nose tackle this year from Pocatello, Idaho. That's the next pipeline is Idaho.
Yeah. What's interesting, Tony and I are at every OSU home game. I think I've been at every OSU home game that's been played since probably 1986, so 34 years, because that's when I started going to school there. It may even go back to the late part of the 85 season, depending on whatever their last game or two was that season. But I've been at every game. What's fun is about 10, 15 minutes before the game or while they're doing the warm-ups, Bob Kennedy, they have this the PA guy, he goes through the entire starting lineup. And it's just interesting when you hear the hometowns of each guy starting for Ohio State. It sounds like it's an NFL team, because you've got guys from probably 14 or 15 different states that are, in the starting lineup week to week, and predominantly most of them from Ohio. But generally, that's been less and less with Urban Meyer. He's taken fewer and fewer guys from Ohio. And I'm doing a review right now on the 2014 recruiting class that'll be up later today. They had 9 of the 23 guys were from Ohio, and then the remaining, whatever that number is, 14 other guys were skewed over 11 states. So with Urban Meyer, they went coast to coast, and obviously still doing the same thing with Ryan Day.
Sneak Spencer 725, just to clarify here, depending on your recruiting service. So ESPN has the Oklahoma kid Mario Williams at number 1, 16th rated player overall. They've got Egbuka as the number 2 rated wide receiver, number 29 overall. So pick your service. They're both extremely talented, 1 and 2, 2 and 1, whatever. Yeah, when they're that close to the top of the list, the number 16 and number 29, they both can play and have supreme talent. So as Steve pointed out, and we discussed a few weeks ago, whether the recruiting class lands at number 1, which looks to be the case, or number 3 or whatever, let's not get caught up in specific rankings. But yeah, just to clarify, Oklahoma just locked up a commit as well, Mario Williams. Zack Harrison. Here's some comments. Once I weed through all the Florida matchups against the Big Ten, that caused quite a flurry of conversation about the Florida matchups against the Big Ten. But once I got through that, comments made about Zack Harrison. What can you say? That guy's a phenomenal talent, 5-star, chose Ohio State over Penn State, Tony.
Well, just going back to what Al Washington said about him when we talked to Washington, the linebackers coach at Ohio State, we talked to him a few weeks ago. He's like, well, let me tell you about Zack Harrison. I saw him. He's 6'6", 260, and he was probably 6'6", 240 when Al Washington saw him. He's like, I saw him run a 700 meters in tennis shoes in the rain. And pretty much that's all you need to know about Zack Harrison. And now as he continues to learn to bend and learn to use his hands, what Larry Johnson, the defensive line coach, calls, putting tools in the toolbox. And it's the feet pointed the right way. It's the shoulder dipped certain way. It's getting the hands on first. It's learning all of these little nuances, because you can be the greatest athlete in the world, but you're not a defensive end. He's turning this in every step of the way. When the crazy thing about Zack Harrison is he was always a 5-star guy, but he was also talked about being, really raw, and he's just a crazy athlete. He's amazing, and he's fast, and he's this and he's that, but he's raw. But every step of the way at Ohio State, he has been advanced, and he's been more than just an athlete. And he hit winter workouts, and he learned from that. And he played last year as a true freshman. Didn't look raw. He looked like a very talented true freshman. He looked like what Chase Young has looked like and what other guys have looked like at that age. And so now missing the spring for all of these guys is bad, and it's too bad, because this is where they continue to learn their craft, and this is where he can become more. And you wonder, as we go on this year and next year, what kind of what will we see as the fallout from not getting this spring? Will there be a delay in some of the guys as they hit their peak? Will they be doing it as a senior rather than a junior? But Zack Harrison, he's what you want in a defensive end. And as Larry Johnson has told me before, he's like, I love to mold clay. I like big blocks of clay. And that's what Zack Harrison is. He's a big block of clay that runs a 10.7, was clocked, I think, in the 4.4s at a Nike combine. He's, like Javon Curse, there was a legend about how he had the best 10 yards split tied with Deion Sanders at the NFL combine or whatever. And you get these crazy athletes, and that's what Zack Harrison is. Sometimes you get these crazy legitimate freaks and they're defensive ends, and that's what he is.
Who's the fastest guy in the roster?
Well, that's a good question.
It was Paris Campbell, right?
When he
it was.
He would tell you that. He would get upset if you told him that he wasn't. But probably in 2018? Yeah.
Maybe Olave now?
I think Olave now. That's probably who most people would say. And, I don't know.
Were any of those 4 wide receivers who are freshmen known as a faster guy than the others?
Steve, Jamison Williams would also tell you he is the fastest.
Okay.
The sophomore receiver out of St. Louis. So I think maybe those two. I don't think any of the freshmen necessarily. They're all fast enough.
I think Banks Banks and Wade in the secondary have great football speed, but I don't know straight line if you'd say that they have, 4.38 speed. I don't know.
Master Teague is the fastest running back last year, according to Tony Alford, the fastest and the biggest. So in a straight line,
Yeah. I was going to mention him because I tried to portray him as more of a Raymond Harris in between the tackles guy, because that's really how they used him last year, and he'd get 4 or 5 yards a clip. And somebody said, no, you got it all wrong. He could be the speed guy if they put him in the right place with the ball maybe on the edge, or I don't know.
I'm like you, Steve. It didn't look like it.
No, he didn't show football speed. That's the thing. And, it's interesting. This even goes back to John Cooper. I can remember him. Cooper, maybe Tressel, Meyer always talked about hitting home runs. Cooper talked about it a little bit, how, a guy maybe as a sophomore or a junior was just starting to scratch the surface of his potential. But like Eddie George, maybe 1,400 yards as a junior, and they still wanted to see more. They still thought there might be more, and then they got it. His last year, he became the home run hitter. He was having 60 and 70-yard touchdown runs and, running over people as well. But to me, that's what they always are trying to build these guys to, is that next progression. And I definitely think Teague has got that potential to go from being the Raymont 4 or 5 yards in a cloud of field turf pebbles to, being a guy that can get you 20, 30 yards and then break that big one to change the game. So that's what they're always striving for.
Well, and Teague, when he was trying to get his offers from Ohio State and Alabama, I believe, camped at both places and would run hand time 4.3s. And I don't know that Alabama offered him. Obviously Ohio State did, and he took that. But getting him to that straight line on the football field is sometimes the issue, and him finding that hole. But I don't know the last Ohio State backup running back to rush for 800 yards and then not do something significant after that as well.
Yeah, I'm working on a thing right now, looking at only 10 times in OSU history that I've found have they had a situation where they've had 3 guys with 500 yards in a season, and 5 of those have actually happened in the last 10 or 15 years with the quarterback mixed in with the other 2. And usually it's been 2 running backs and a quarterback, but I'm hoping to put that together in the week ahead, because I do foresee a committee with Sirmon, Teague, Chambers, Crowley. Hopefully they can redshirt Jamison Williams and see how he comes through it. But yeah, I'm of a mind that it's going to be spread around more than it's going to be one directed guy.
It brings into light the under recruitment of Chris Olave. As soon as you guys mentioned that he's maybe one of the top 5 fastest guys on the team, that he's with the kind of skill set that he has. In addition to that, you just figure, okay, he's under the radar because he can't run elite at an elite level, but he's got all these skills and he turned out to be a gamer. But for him to fly under the radar for that long is...
Well, I believe he missed his junior season. I don't know if it was a transfer issue, but then he blows up as a senior, and Ohio State was in on him early, and so I think that stuck with him. But yeah, the junior season is like so huge for recruits, because that's when schools and everything start noticing them, and that's because by the time a player is a senior, sometimes there's no more room for them in a lot of places, because they have the scholarship slots all filled. And as Urban Meyer would lament all the time, recruiting has moved so fast now, and you can't see guys as seniors develop. You may only have a spot for a couple of them, and he would try to hold back one spot for an Ohio senior just to see, just in case somebody developed and came on late, that he could then offer them. And now, as Steve mentioned, if there's no Ohio football or there's no high school football, then how do you? There's none of that development. Ryan Day is trying to get spring football in Ohio to help the Ohio development. But yeah, I think Chris Olave, I believe he just missed his junior year, and Ohio State was in on them early. I believe they were recruiting a quarterback at that time, and that's how they mixed together and found him.
Yeah, Olave, it was interesting. Pat Murphy from our staff and formerly of your staff, Tony, the great Pat Murphy was writing about great individual games that Buckeyes had, and he left out Olave against Indiana. I was down there taking pictures with your friend Harker from your staff, and he and I are down there, and we're about getting run over by Chris Olave. He blocked a punt, and then he came back 2 minutes later and got behind the Indiana defense for a touchdown, and showed great football speed on both those plays, obviously. So I don't know how he translates on that 40 time, but he's good enough to win you football games off his speed and athletic ability right there. Those two plays almost back to back, really, in that game for the Buckeyes. So, guys, I got to run and get my hair cut. So I will.
All right, Steve, we appreciate it.
Next time.
See you, Steve.
Good to see you as always. You'll be looking sharp next week for sure.
Well, I'll be here. We don't know how I'll be looking.
And Olave got a punt against Michigan, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's
Columbus.
That's you using that speed to get around the edge, you get through there, get through the middle, and get there before that ball gets off. And how many times did we see him last year where he's got 5-6 yards room past the corner on a deep route? And he's fast. Jamison Williams, though, is the guy when he's running. He had you remember the 57-yard touchdown he had last year on a catch and run early on the season. He looks like Ted Ginn once he gets in that full sprint. I'm not saying he's Ted Ginn or as fast as Ted Ginn, but there's some similarities there just in that stride. And I know he's another guy that he's a forgotten guy, but he and Chris Olave will be the Z's this year for Ohio State, along with maybe one of the freshmen. But don't forget about Jamison Williams.
Now, of course, speed is speed, and you can tell who the fast guys are out there and who are they're all fast at those positions, but who the elite guys are. But when you mention Ginn, there are certain guys that just the way they run, they just either look faster or slower, and they're really, really fast, but they just maybe have an awkward. But Ginn just looked great too. He just, oh my goodness, that guy used to just, for the first several games I watched him, I just couldn't believe it, and it must have been the defenders couldn't believe it as well. The angles that they would take, and still he would beat the angles. Mm-hmm. It took players a long time to get used to his speed in the Big Ten. Yeah,
I don't know that it doesn't matter once you get used to it either. But I got to see him in the Big 33 and Ohio North South game and these Ohio All-Star games where he was clearly the best player, the best corner, the best receiver. But yeah, he's one of those guys that you hold your breath, and it's like, it's when he's running, it's like you can hear music that's like a symphony going on, and like him and I think maybe Devin Hester, maybe the two fastest college football players with completely different running styles. Like Devin Hester, his legs are moving so fast, it's like Sonic the Hedgehog, where it's he's churning out so many strides. And Ted Ginn, there's never been anything like him, I don't think.
I don't point these two guys out because they're both Buckeyes, but it works with the show. Ginn and Joey Galloway. Mm-hmm. Now, unlike, let's say, the baseball pitcher who relies on the fastball, then he turns 30, 35 years old, and then he picks up a pitch or two. Those guys just stayed fast, like beyond their age. They were
Darryl Green.
Ginn still playing. Joey Galloway was in the league forever and still could burn and take the top off a defense.
I think Joey Galloway is probably like 43 or 44, and he might be one of those guys that can run his age. Like 43 will run a 4.3, 44 run a 4.4, something like that. And he was, I remember the stories about him benching 400 pounds, running 4.19 is, I believe, the number that was attached to him, not officially by the NFL, but he was one of those guys like him and Dion, where sub 4.2 is, the legends that you grow up hearing. And he's another forgotten guy who played. It's too bad he played when he did. If he would be playing in today's college football, then I saw Rondale Moore's name pop up. You get Joey Galloway on an offense where he touches the ball 120 times and he's walking away with a Heisman.
As soon as you say that, I'm reminded of a game against Illinois and Champaign in '91 in which Ohio State did not throw the ball in the first half. And of course, Joey Galloway was on the field the entire first half.
Mm-hmm.
Just couldn't throw the ball and didn't score any points. It wasn't like they were running for 250 yards and they had 3 touchdowns at halftime. They didn't have any points. They were down 7-0 at the half and still couldn't find with Jeff Graham, who was a very good wide receiver with the Bears and other teams, caught like 90 balls a couple times. Galloway, I'm sure maybe Brian Stabline, who played in the NFL for 3 or 4 years, was so they had weapons, but that was the way the game was played to a certain extent at that point.
And even a couple of years later, you had Galloway and Glenn on the same 93 team, 94-ish, somewhere in there. And but yeah, the quarterback play wasn't there yet, and the offensive desire wasn't quite there yet. Although they still had some of their best passing games were best passing seasons were 95 and 98 with Bobby Hoying throwing for over 3,000 yards and Joe Germain throwing for over 3,000 yards. And since then, now you've had JT Barrett did it, I believe, in 2017. Then Dwayne Haskins went for over 46 or something in 2018. And then Justin Fields, 3,200 and some last year. So they're finally catching up with that late 90s passing offense here at Ohio State, right?
That brings to mind, I was flipping by one of these Big Ten Network specials, whether it was the Elite Series or the Journey or whatever it was, but they were looking back at the 95 Northwestern team that came out of nowhere to go to the Rose Bowl. And of course, Ohio State would have won the Big Ten championship had they beat Michigan with that tremendously talented offense, lost to Michigan. About 3 to 4 years later, I got a chance to interview Brian Musso, who was kind of the jack of all trades back for Northwestern, kind of a poor man's Christian McCaffrey. And he flat out told me, so Northwestern, as you well know, Tony, I'm talking to everybody else to a certain extent, Northwestern and Ohio State were tied going into the final game of the season with no losses in conference play. Northwestern lost some kind of odd out-of-conference game, as they typically do, even back then, to like Miami of Ohio or somebody. So Ohio State would have, with the undefeated record, gone to the Rose Bowl and been playing for a national championship. No, the two teams did not play. Brian Musso told me, we would see Ohio State on tape, every other week preparing for our opponents. We did not want to see that. He just flat out just said we didn't want to see them.
Well, and then the next year they had a really good year as well, and both years coincide with no Ohio State on the schedule, and but still, it was a great story. Everybody was rooting for Northwestern back then, but I don't think it would have gone well for the Wildcats against either of those teams.
And it would have gone much better in terms of an entertaining Rose Bowl because USC pretty much clocked Northwestern.
Yeah,
with Keyshawn Johnson.
Well, and I think I've told this story before. I was at that Michigan game in '95 as a student. It was a done deal. Ohio State was going to beat them. Ohio State won in '94, so a new leaf had been turned over. And then walking out of the stadium, and the cops, on the crosswalks are making fun of Buckeye fans. Saying we got roses here, roses for cheap. You want some roses? And so it was not a great scene as the police mocked Buckeye fans, and so did the Michigan fans. So yeah, but then Northwestern got to go and got their butts handed to them.
And they've been a decent program since. So that was kind of a turning point for a Northwestern program that was just the laughing stock of the nation. Think Kansas. Now, people, if you're not familiar with the Northwestern's plight from
without the
80s,
book learning.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Shane Roth, we did address, Tony did the Trace Sirmon fit into the offense. So just check out the video once it posts. And everybody else that's on the line, if you missed some of it, the video should be available in just a few minutes after we wrap up here. We got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone, Steve Hellwagon, of course, from Bucknuts. Tony, as always, this was week 52, so we've made it a full year.
A lot has happened in that year, Mark.
Yeah, a lot has happened in the last 6 weeks.
It feels like a year.
that part of it does. So we will be watching football at some point. And they will be possibly piping generic audio from classic games of the past or something at us.
But the coaches you mentioned earlier, like how will the players get up for it? How a team will they get up for it? There's nobody watching practice, and they get up for those. So, I think that's what the coaches will tell you.
All right, Tony. Thank you so much. You have a great weekend.
You too.
All right, everybody else, we will see you soon. Check out the videos posted each day and call-in show 10 o'clock p.m. on Sunday night. See everybody later.